Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Jury selection is underway as 4 Michigan men stand trial for attempted kidnap of their state's governor. Plus,
my reading of the case file and my understanding of the evidence in the case is that she was murdered by Ryan Duke while in her home here in Irwin County.
the murder of one-time Georgia beauty queen Tara Grinstead. A pretrial hearing puts prosecutors on the witness stand. And a California woman now charged for faking her own kidnapping back in 2016. But first,
we finally got to hear from Scotty David about the discrepancy on his juror questionnaire.
we break down the testimony of federal juror number 50, who helped convict Ghislaine Maxwell. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer, along with Terry Austin. A federal juror who helped convict sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell is questioned under oath after answers on his juror questionnaire didn't match his real-life experiences. He testified on Tuesday, quote, "This is one of the biggest mistakes I have made in my life." On the stand, David acknowledged he had been sexually assaulted by his stepbrother as a child, but indicated on his juror questionnaire that he had never been sexually abused. On Tuesday, David told federal judge Allison Nathan that he, quote, "flew through the questionnaire and was super distracted while filling it out in a noisy room." David was part of a federal jury that convicted Maxwell on counts of sex trafficking and procuring minors for Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. After the verdict, David spoke out to several news outlets, commenting on his own experience with sexual assault. Since then, doubt has been cast over Maxwell's guilty verdict. Ahead of Tuesday's questioning, David indicated he would invoke his Fifth Amendment right if called to the stand. Prosecutors then offered David immunity for his testimony, which the Department of Justice signed off on Monday. That means David cannot be prosecuted for any information revealed during his testimony. Both sides are due back in court on March 15th to discuss the ramifications of David's testimony. Law and Crime's Adam Klasfeld was at the federal courthouse Tuesday as David was questioned under oath. He explains how news broke of the juror questionnaire discrepancy and why Maxwell's defense feels they may be granted a retrial.
It came out the more he told news organizations about the inside of deliberations. He said this verdict is for all sexual assault victims. He talked about how his experiences with sexual abuse informed not only his deliberations, but helped other jurors in their deliberations. Because remember, we spoke throughout the trial that the key part of the prosecution's case was grooming, and that a lot of the ways that Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers tried to undermine testimony from the victims was pointing out discrepancies in traumatic memory. Scotty David said in media interviews again and again that he understood that memory, traumatic memory in particular, isn't perfect in the wake of sexual abuse, and that he said that perspective informed his deliberations. This is why, that's why Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers are saying, hey, this thing that he did not disclose in a jury questionnaire informed this verdict, and that's why they're pinning their hopes on a retrial on those interviews.
Joining us today is civil rights attorney Sue Ann Robinson and Terry Austin. Sue Ann, according to Adam, we will not see any of the other Maxwell jurors testify. Why may that be?
I think that the inquiry is focused on him and what he said and whether or not what he was saying or his experiences affected the outcome of the case. So I don't think there's really a need to call the other jurors. I think the issue has to do with his misrepresentation and what he possibly said when he was in the jury room. But I don't think there's a need for the other jurors to become involved.
Yeah, it seems like, as you said, the issue is squarely on him, and they may have got all the information they needed. But Terry, David said his answer was an innocent mistake. Should the judge just accept that as his explanation?
You know, this is somewhat a subjective process. The judge has to seriously consider what he testified to. He basically said he made an innocent mistake. He said that he thought that the sexual abuse applied to friends and family and didn't apply to him. She's going to have to determine whether or not that was the case. But more importantly, Brian, she's going to have to determine whether or not it affected his deliberation and the entire jury. And we know, based on what Adam was reporting and what we've heard, that it did affect the deliberation, particularly of David's test. You know, he basically said it affected him. And we know it also affected the rest of that jury. And as much as we may not want to see a new trial, you know, Maxwell is entitled to, under the Constitution, a fair and impartial jury. So I definitely think that there's a good possibility she could get a new trial.
Yeah, and that's the one part where I'm thinking maybe one other juror should testify to say, hey, he said this, I heard it, and it kind of affected my decision. Maybe, maybe not, but we'll see how it plays out, and of course, give you the update as it comes in. Also in federal court in New York, jury selection began Tuesday in the trial for accused Sarah Lawrence sex cult leader Lawrence Ray. For about 10 years, Ray allegedly abused and extorted several of his daughter's classmates who were students at Sarah Lawrence College. It all started when the 62-year-old former Wall Street trader moved into his daughter's on-campus housing in 2010, just days after being released from prison. Officials say he soon gained control over his daughter's friends, presenting himself as a father figure and holding group therapy sessions. Over the next 10 years, he allegedly extorted money from the students and isolated them from their families, even moving them into an apartment in New York City, then eventually to North Carolina. His alleged crimes were investigated after authorities caught wind of a 2019 New York Magazine article revealing the abuse and manipulation. One of the students was indicted for her role in the scheme. She will face a separate trial set for this summer. Ray faces a 17-count indictment, including charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, forced labor, money laundering, and tax evasion. He faces life in prison if convicted. Opening statements are expected to begin on Wednesday. We're now hearing for the first time from Curtis Reeves just weeks after he was acquitted in the murder of Chad Olson. Law&Crime Daily brought you gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial that ended with a not guilty verdict for Reeves. Prosecutors say Reeves shot and killed Olson in 2014 after a conflict broke out at a movie theater. Reeves, an ex-police officer, claims self-defense, saying he shot and killed Olson, believing he would be attacked. He says Olson was on his cell phone during the movie's previews and threw popcorn at him after Reeves asked him to turn off his phone. Reeves spent nearly 8 years on house arrest awaiting trial. After a failed stand-your-ground hearing in 2017, Reeves went to trial in January on second-degree murder charges. A jury acquitted Reeves of all charges after only 3 hours of deliberation. In an exclusive interview with ABC News, Reeves explained why he reacted by grabbing his weapon.
I was looking at the previews, and then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, he's on his feet, and I got hit in the face.
You got hit in the face?
Correct. There was something that flashed in front of my face, and at the same time, my vision kind of went blurry.
And is that the point where you pulled your gun?
Well, for 48 years, I've carried a firearm, either on duty as law enforcement or as retired, with all the proper credentials. It was at some point when I realized that he was trying to either reach for me or hit me again or strike me again, is at that point is when I went for the weapon.
Do you wish you'd left your gun at home?
Had I left my gun at home, there's a good chance that I wouldn't be here today.
In a statement to ABC News, Olson's widow said in part, quote, "For 8 long years, I had to wait and try to fight for justice. Even though the jury got it wrong, I will not accept this result lying down." Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, accused killer Ryan Duke once again in the courtroom ahead of his trial in the high-profile case of a missing beauty queen. But first, a California woman who officials say faked her own kidnapping now faces even more serious charges at the federal level. We break down the case of Sherry Papini next.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. A California mother who claimed she had been kidnapped is now facing federal charges accused of lying to the FBI, mail fraud, and more. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with the details on Sherry Papini's case.
Brian, when Sherry Papini went missing in November of 2016, it set off a massive search effort, not only in California, where she lived, but also in several other states. She was found 22 days later on an interstate about 150 miles from the location where she actually lived. Federal officials say that in August of 2020, Papini lied when confronted by FBI agents with evidence that she faked her own abduction, but that she continued with her original story that she had been kidnapped. Papini claimed 2 Hispanic women in a dark SUV abducted and tortured her. But her ex-boyfriend told investigators Papini actually stayed with him during the time she was missing and that she inflicted injuries, including branding, on herself. Papini was married with 2 children at the time. Surveillance video emerged showing Papini near a church, and you can actually see her on the left of the screen. She claimed at that time that she was running away from her abductors. Now, Papini is also accused of mail fraud as part of this. She's also accused of defrauding the California Victims' Compensation Board of more than $30,000 for therapy visits, and about $1,000 of that was used to buy blinds for her home. The sheriff of Shasta County is not ruling out that others could be charged in this case. He says that Sherry Papini and her family used her disappearance for financial gain, raising about $49,000 on GoFundMe and using that money for personal expenses and to pay off credit card bills. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Let's bring back civil rights attorneys Sue Ann Robinson and Terry Austin as we jump into the case of Sherry Papini. Terry, why is this a federal case and not a state case?
Well, there are multiple reasons. It's a federal case that's under a federal jurisdiction. First of all, they called the FBI to help investigate, to use their resources. And she lied to the FBI. And once you lie to the FBI, that is a federal offense. And she was even warned during her interview not to lie. It's also federal because of that mail fraud that Anjanette mentioned. Automatically, that becomes federal. And that GoFundMe campaign is what makes it that mail fraud. So she has, for a number of reasons. Also, she went after state lines. So that, too, is another reason why it can come under the federal jurisdiction. So it's a shame. It's a waste of resources. But I'm glad they finally are going after her.
All right, Sue, maybe I'm connecting dots that shouldn't be connected, but a lot of the stuff I'm hearing is familiar. We saw the Chicago Police Department seek restitution in the Jussie Smollett case for his hoax of a crime. Could we see the same here?
We need to. We need to see all of that force and vigor in this prosecution, because this is even worse because she's involved people potentially internationally through the GoFundMe account and made direct misrepresentations to the FBI. So I definitely hope that we're going to see her having to pay restitution for all the resources that she used and really have to go through with the whole thing, the trial, everything. She should not be treated any differently than Jussie Smollett or any other person who improperly uses police to effectuate a scam.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. Anjanette, how did the FBI and sheriff's detectives find the ex-boyfriend you mentioned?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Brian. He didn't just come out of the woodwork. What happened was when Sherry Papini was found, a truck driver called 911. The police come and pick her up. She's taken to the hospital. They get her clothing. They test it for DNA. They find DNA in her underwear. They run that through a familial DNA site. They find out who this person could be related to. They kind of deduced it from there, and they got a bottle out of his trash, swabbed it, got a DNA sample. It was a match, and then they went and interviewed him, and he came clean.
All right, interesting process there. We'll see how this case unfolds and make sure to give you more updates as it does. Thank you all. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the federal trial begins as 4 Michigan men stand trial for attempted kidnapping of their state's governor. Plus, nearly 20 years after Tara Grinstead's murder, an accused murderer will soon stand trial. The latest development in the case of Ryan Duke. Welcome back. A high-profile case is back in the courtroom this week ahead of the trial for accused killer Ryan Duke, a man charged with the murder of former Georgia teacher and beauty queen Tara Grinstead. Duke will stand trial for murder 16 years after Grinstead went missing. Prosecutors say he and his accomplice Bo Dukes were former students at the school where Grinstead worked. The news of Grinstead's disappearance in 2005 swept the nation, but the investigation soon turned cold. The former beauty queen was declared dead in 2010. Then, in 2017, investigators said a tip had led them to arrest Duke and Dukes. Dukes had already been convicted and sentenced in connection to the crime for helping cover up Grinstead's death. He was expected to testify at Tuesday's pretrial hearing about a meeting he had had with investigators in 2017. But attorneys agreed he could speak to his lawyers before taking the stand. The special assistant district attorney did testify about that meeting. He answered questions from the prosecution about any discussions about deals for Dukes.
Do you know, having been the prosecutor, one of the prosecutors on both the Irwin County case, the Ben Hill case, and the Wilcox case, of any deals that have ever been made with Bo Dukes?
There have never been any deals that I have made or that I'm aware that you or Mr. Bowden has made to Mr. Bo Dukes, ever.
And in fact, there's never even been use immunity given to Mr. Dukes at this point.
There has never, Bo Dukes has never testified for me, and that's all I can speak of, is what I have done in Ben Hill nor in Wilcox. He has never testified in any grand jury proceeding. I never gave him immunity, and he never testified in any proceeding that I've been a part of, ever.
Civil rights attorney Sue Ann Robinson and co-host Terry Austin are back to break down the death of a Georgia beauty queen. Terry, what have we learned about the trial in today's hearing so far?
Well, the whole issue today was whether or not Bo Dukes was granted this immunity, whether there was some sort of plea deal. And in fact, he didn't get on the stand, but the prosecution and the defense in that case did testify, and they made it extremely clear that there was never any sort of deal made. So it looks like Ryan Duke is going to have to basically go to trial, and Bo Dukes is not going to be an issue at all as far as that case is concerned.
Interesting. Now, Sue Ann, the state Supreme Court now says Duke will have state funds for experts. Based on the experts that he's asking for, what kind of defense could we expect?
I think that based on what he's asking for, he's hoping to give some sort of testimony about or introduce evidence that it wasn't me experts. Hopefully, I mean, there's a lot of issues in this case in terms of identity, and I think he's going to try to attack the DNA evidence.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Of course, we got DNA experts, probably a false confession expert. It's going to be interesting to see how they try to raise reasonable doubt to the experts. But of course, as it starts, we here at Law&Crime Daily, we give you that gavel-to-gavel coverage. When we come back, jury selection begins in federal court as 4 men are charged with attempted kidnapping of the Michigan governor. Our Terry Austin breaks down the case so far. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. Federal jury selection begins in Michigan as 4 men are charged with conspiracy to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer in October 2020. Our own Terry Austin has more on the case.
Brian, prosecutors claim the 4 men conspired to kidnap Governor Whitmer because of her actions to contain COVID-19 during the beginning of the pandemic. Prosecutors plan to use secret recordings and key witnesses to build their case. The 4 men, Barry Croft Jr., Daniel Harris, Adam Fox, and Brandon Caserta, are accused of taking substantial steps over several months, including secret messaging, gun drills in the woods, and a drive to Whitmer's second home to determine how to blow up a nearby bridge. The FBI infiltrated the group and thwarted the plan. They originally arrested 6 men, but 2 of them, Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks, have pleaded guilty and will appear as key witnesses for the prosecution. The trial could last more than a month, and Judge Robert Jonker told prospective jurors, quote, "This isn't your average criminal case because of the extraordinary allegations of a plot against an elected official." If convicted, all 4 men could face the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in prison. Brian?
You heard it there. 2 of the defendants have already pled guilty. Do you expect them to be the prosecutor's star witness and kind of tie everything together here?
Absolutely. They participated in the crime and the accusations, and so they're absolutely going to be the star witnesses.
All right. Now, Terry, they never actually kidnapped the governor. It appears they only took steps. So what does the prosecution need to prove in order to make their case?
Well, basically, Brian, this is a conspiracy to kidnap. So under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, they actually don't have to show that the crime was actually committed. All they have to do is focus on that plan and the steps that were taken to execute that plan. And as we know, the plan involved more than one defendant. Here we have multiple defendants, so it has to have more than one person to have a conspiracy. And frankly, the prosecution has indicated that they have much evidence against these witnesses and these defendants because they have all of the evidence that they need. They have recordings, they have people who are going to testify. So I think they have a solid case. I think they're going to be able to show the conspiracy.
Now, Swan, real quick, I want to come back to you. Any potential defense you see here? I mean, there's a lot of evidence against them, it seems.
Well, I saw in one of the January 6th defendants say that they were bragging. That was their defense, that they just talked a lot. But I think the issue here is that the state has evidence that they took steps in furtherance of the conspiracy, and that's really what's going to kind of lock them in and give the prosecution hopefully a successful case.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting argument. They were just bragging, and I can see that being a potential defense here, especially looking at what happened on January 6th, potential defendants, and in this case, well, we'll see how it plays out, and we'll continue to keep eyes on this case. Even though it's a federal case, can't put a camera in it. Well, thank you both, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.